Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the pastel-colored world of party balloons, birthday clowns, and wholesome suburban barbecues, but behind the cheer is a crawl space filled with unspoken terror. As you close your eyes, imagine the cool basement floor under your feet, the faint scent of grease paint, and a man smiling just a little too widely from behind thick white makeup. That's Pogo the Clown. And no, you probably won't survive this bedtime story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop your city and what time it is where you are right now. Let's see who else can't sleep tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a crowded Chicago street fair. The late 1970s heat clings to your neck. Children are running with balloons. The scent of grilled meat lingers in the air, and laughter bubbles all around. Then you see him, a clown, short and wide, waddling through the crowd. He's got a red nose, blue triangles over his eyes, and an American flag hat sitting cheerily on his head. People smile, wave, the kids run to him. But you feel your stomach drop. He introduces himself as Pogo the Clown. His voice is light and goofy, like it's rehearsed. But his eyes? They don't match the voice. They're cold, still, like he's not here to make you laugh at all. That clown John Wayne Gacy would later be convicted of killing 33 boys and young men. At least, that's the official number. Some still believe there are more, maybe many more. The idea of a killer clown has become almost cliche now. It floats around pop culture, watered down into Halloween masks and horror flicks. But this isn't fiction. You're walking straight into the true story of a man who used costumes and charm to hide one of the darkest criminal minds in American history. And the most chilling part? Gacy wasn't some drifter in the woods or a shadow in an alley. He was the guy grilling burgers in your neighbor's backyard, the one shaking hands with politicians, the man who made balloon animals at charity events. Born on March 17, 1942, Gacy came into the world on the south side of Chicago, a place known for its grit and working-class backbone. His father was an auto repair machinist and a WWIE veteran. Tough, proud, and deeply alcoholic. Gacy's mother tried to smooth the edges, but she couldn't keep up with the cruelty that seeped into their home. As a child, Gacy was sickly. He suffered from heart conditions, was overweight, and couldn't play sports like the other boys. That meant he stayed inside closer to his mother, further from his father's approval, and that didn't sit well with the man of the house. "Mama's boy," his father would sneer, usually with a slap or a belt in hand. Historians still argue whether Gacy's abusive upbringing created the monster he became, or whether the darkness was always inside him, waiting. But one thing's clear: shame and violence marked his childhood like fingerprints on a window pane. As a teen, Gacy dropped out of high school and fled to Las Vegas. Not for the nightlife, he worked as an ambulance attendant and then at a mortuary. That's right, at just 18, he was sleeping on a cot behind the embalming room. One night, he reportedly climbed into a coffin with a male corpse, holding it for a long time. He said he felt fascinated. He also said he felt disgusted with himself afterward. You know, red flag. Meet red flag. Quirky tidbit for you, Gacy later claimed he didn't really remember much from that time. But ask anyone who's ever been that close to death. You remember everything. By 1964, he had moved to Illinois, gotten engaged, and started working for his soon-to-be father-in-law's KFC franchise. Yes, that KFC. He managed 3 restaurants in Iowa and quickly became the golden boy of the company. White shirt, black tie, clean-shaven. He looked like every 50s postcard of success. To the outside world, John Wayne Gacy had made it. But behind the scenes, he was spiraling. That year, he was arrested for sexually assaulting a teenage boy, and then another. He tried to pay one off with money, threatened another with violence. When the stories surfaced, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife left him the same day he went to jail. He only served 18 months. That's the first of many uncomfortable truths you're going to face in this story. Gacy kept getting second chances. The system? It kept looking away. Back in Chicago, Gacy built a new life from the ground up. Bought a house in Norwood Park, a quiet suburb with neat lawns and steady neighbors. He threw huge barbecues, joined the local Moose Lodge, rubbed shoulders with city politicians. He even dressed as Pogo the Clown for parties and hospital visits. You can almost see it, can't you? The clown makeup, the red rubber nose, the white gloves reaching into the crowd. But here's a fun fact. Most people miss his clown designs were angular, with sharp points around the mouth and eyes. Real clowns avoid sharp lines, they're seen as threatening. But Gacy? He leaned into the fear, even when no one noticed. He told people he just loved to make kids laugh. He didn't mention the handcuffs hidden in his nightstand, or the rope, or the freshly dug crawl space under his home. And so the painted smile widened as the bodies began to disappear. You're back in Chicago, the snow still crusted along the curbs. Gacy's house tucked innocently between others just like it. Same neat lawn, same friendly porch light, but before you ever saw the clown or the crawl space, there was the boy, the one who never quite belonged, never quite felt safe. John Wayne Gacy didn't arrive in this world as a killer. He arrived as a little boy in a broken house with a name that sounded like a Western hero. Born during the Second World War to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson, he grew up shadowed by expectations and failures that never quite felt like his own. His father wanted a man's man, athletic, tough, proud. But young John was sick a lot, spending more days in bed than on the baseball field. He fainted often. He couldn't keep up. And in his father's eyes, that meant weakness. You hear that a lot in these stories, don't you? Weakness. Fathers trying to beat it out of their sons like it's a stain. Historians still argue whether this kind of trauma plants the seed or just waters it. But Gacy's seed was deeply buried under layers of shame, fear, and rejection. He idolized his father, even while nursing bruises he didn't deserve. There's a memory he would later share in interviews, maybe true, maybe not, about being beaten with a razor strop after accidentally rearranging engine parts in the garage. His mother tried to defend him, but in the Gacy household, Dad's word was law. And John? He learned to lie early, to smile when things hurt, to pretend. A quirky little aside here. Despite his fragile health, Gacy was oddly ambitious. At school, he ran for class office multiple times. He didn't win, but he kept running. He joined the Boy Scouts, though his father mocked him for it. He even volunteered at local political rallies as a teen, shaking hands like he already knew how to charm a crowd. The need to be liked, really liked, was already burning strong. By 18, Gacy had dropped out of high school entirely. The fainting spells, migraines, and a mysterious heart condition had kept him behind academically. But he didn't want pity, he wanted purpose. That's when he hopped a Greyhound bus and headed west to Las Vegas, Sin City. But not for the slots. He found work as a janitor at Palm Mortuary, one of the city's oldest funeral homes. By day, he cleaned. By night, he slept on a cot near the embalming room. That's where he had that moment, the one everyone talks about. One night, alone in the quiet building, he reportedly crawled into a coffin with the body of a young man and lay there, holding the corpse. He later claimed it was just curiosity, that he fled in horror after realizing how disturbed he'd become. But that one moment, it's the kind that sticks in your brain like a splinter. Still, Gacy left Las Vegas shortly after and returned to Chicago, where he enrolled in a business college and actually finished a degree. By 22, he was married to Marlon Myers, the daughter of a wealthy Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise owner. He moved to Waterloo, Iowa, and became manager of 3 locations, earning the title Colonel among staff. Yes, seriously, Colonel Gacy. Imagine getting your mashed potatoes from that guy. He wore crisp shirts, kept his hair neat, drove a flashy car, and called employees into his office for one-on-one chats. Sometimes about work, sometimes not. Whispers started circulating about inappropriate conversations, late-night meetings, boys hired for their looks. But there was no proof. Not yet. In 1968, a 15-year-old boy came forward, saying Gacy had lured him with booze and porn, then assaulted him in the back of a car. Gacy denied it all, of course, blamed the kid. But within weeks, more boys came forward with near-identical stories. The evidence mounted. He was arrested and ultimately convicted of sodomy and attempted assault. 10 years in prison, they said. But here's the catch. He only served 18 months. Let that settle in. 18 months. For multiple assaults on teenage boys. When Gacy went to prison, his wife filed for divorce, and took full custody of their 2 children. She never saw him again. In prison, though, he was a model inmate. Of course he was. Joined the choir, worked in the kitchen, even convinced the prison to open a chapter of the Jaycees, a civic organization for young businessmen. You start to see it, right? The same pattern. Charm, smile, conform, hide the monster under polished shoes and neatly folded sleeves. By 1970, he was released, just like that. And the world welcomed him back. He moved into a house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park. Quiet neighborhood, good schools. Nobody knew about his past. He even got his criminal record sealed in 1974, as if those boys in Iowa had never existed. From there, the masks started stacking up figuratively and literally. He launched a construction company called PDM Contractors Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance. He hired mostly young men and teenagers. Said he liked giving lost boys a second chance. Some of them never came home. At the same time, he joined the local Moose Lodge, where he met a group of amateur clowns who did charity events. Gacy? He took to it instantly. Invented 2 clown characters, Pogo and Patches. Pogo was the friendly one, the silly one. Patches was quieter, sadder, meaner, maybe even more honest. You can't make this stuff up. Soon, he was appearing at parades, hospital visits, children's parties, always cheerful, always laughing, sometimes too cheerful. Once, he told a colleague, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." And then he laughed. No one thought much of it at the time, but you do now, don't you? You're standing now in the middle of Gacy's spotless suburban kitchen. Linoleum floor is gleaming, the scent of stale cigarette smoke faint in the air. A roast is in the oven. The TV plays quietly in the background. Some forgettable sitcom. Everything looks normal, and that's the point. From the outside, John Wayne Gacy was the American dream in chunky flesh. A self-made businessman, a proud homeowner, a community guy who knew the mayor by name and could fix a broken faucet in under 10 minutes. But walk a little further in, and the wallpaper starts to peel. Behind closed doors, everything gets tighter, darker, stranger. After his early release from prison in 1970, Gacy wasted no time rebuilding his life. His mother moved in with him briefly at the Somerdale house, probably to help keep up appearances, probably to help him appear respectable again. And, well, it worked. Gacy started throwing elaborate neighborhood barbecues. Picture it. Paper lanterns strung across the yard, laughter spilling into the evening, kids running through sprinklers, while Pogo the Clown hands out balloon animals. All American, and all fake. He kept busy. The PDM construction business took off odd jobs at first, then real contracts with city departments, even schools. He mostly hired teenage boys and young men, many of whom were down on their luck or estranged from their families. Gacy said he was giving them work experience. He didn't say he was studying them. There's something deeply unsettling about how routine it all became. The recruiting, the grooming, the way he'd start with a job offer, a drink, maybe weed, a game of pool, a little bravado. You ever tried handcuffs before? Just for fun, just a party trick. Then, bet you can't get out. And when they couldn't, when they panicked, when they realized the game had no punchline, it was already too late. One of the things historians still argue about is just how many people knew, or at least suspected, what was going on. There were warning signs, strange noises in the night, sudden disappearances, rumors among the boys who worked for him. But no one spoke loud enough. Maybe they didn't want to believe the man who danced around in clown shoes could be a killer. Or maybe they were just scared. A quirky tidbit here. Gacy had a very particular set of house rules. Guests couldn't use the phone without permission. They couldn't go into certain parts of the house. And the crawl space? Completely off limits. When a contractor once asked about the terrible smell wafting up through the floorboards, Gacy casually blamed it on mildew and changed the subject. He got married again in 1972 to a woman named Carol Hoff, a recently divorced mother of 2 daughters. She'd known him since high school, thought he'd changed. For a while, they played house. Christmases, birthdays, vacations to Florida. But something always felt off. The mood swings, the late nights. The boys who came and went at odd hours. Gacy told her they were just employees, that she was being paranoid. And then there was the smell. It lingered under the floor vents. Musky. Rotting. Carol complained constantly. Gacy insisted it was a plumbing issue. He even hired someone to dig around under the crawlspace, ostensibly to fix pipes, but nothing was ever really resolved. The odor would leave, then return, stronger. By 1976, the marriage collapsed. Carol moved out with her daughters. She filed for divorce, citing cruelty. But she never looked back. She wouldn't be the last to run. Now the house was Gacy's alone, and that's when things escalated. In the years between 1976 and 1978, the frequency of disappearances around the area increased. Boys who were last seen with Gacy, boys who had been hired by him, boys who had stopped by for a drink. Some weren't even linked to him at the time, just vanished. No leads, no urgency, no justice. The police didn't connect the dots. Not yet. Many of the missing were labeled runaways. It was the 1970s, after all kids left home and didn't come back. Nobody looked too closely. Nobody wanted to cause a fuss. Gacy used that, relied on it. And then there was his political life. You'd think a man with a criminal record wouldn't be embraced by local politicians. But Gacy? He charmed his way into the Chicago Democratic Party's good graces, took pictures with Rosalind Carter. Yes, the First Lady. He even got a special badge identifying him as a precinct captain, one of his proudest possessions. He kept it framed on the wall. That's the part that chills you now, isn't it? The duality. The smiling volunteer, helping organize parades and voter drives, who, at night, was dragging bodies through the narrow opening into his crawl space, stacking them like firewood under the floor. Neighbors started noticing things, though. Boys knocking on doors asking about a contractor who lived down the block, then vanishing. Strange hours. That smell again. There was one particularly bizarre story from this time. Gacy had invited a friend over for drinks and asked if he wanted to try a neat trick with handcuffs. The guy agreed, thinking it was all in fun. But the second the cuffs clicked shut, Gacy's expression changed. Cold, calculated. "The trick," he whispered, "is you have to have the key." The friend panicked, thinking it was a joke. Gacy eventually released him, laughing it off. That friend never came back, and he never reported it. That silence? It was everywhere. People dismissed red flags as just John being John. The clown, the jokester, the weird neighbor with the barbecues and loud music. No one wanted to be the first to say what they were starting to suspect, because if they were right, that would mean the monster wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was smiling from across the picket fence. "You're at a local community center now." Folding chairs scraping against linoleum floors as people drift in for another meet and greet. Balloons bob in the corners. Coffee percolates somewhere off to the side. And there's John Wayne Gacy shaking hands, slapping backs, laughing too loud. The polyester suit clings to him in the humid Chicago air, but he's working the room like he owns it. You'd never guess that this sweaty, over-friendly guy had already buried more than a dozen boys under his house. But that's the terrifying beauty of it. Gacy wasn't lurking on the fringes. He was dead center, hiding in plain sight. After his second divorce, Gacy poured himself into two things: his construction business and his image as a community man. He started donating to local fundraisers, hosting block parties, rubbing shoulders with aldermen and police officials. It wasn't about giving back, it was about being seen, being respected, being untouchable. He told people he wanted to run for office one day. And for a while, people thought he could. I mean, who wouldn't trust the clown who built your kid's school lunchroom? Historians still debate how much of Gacy's political success was clever manipulation versus the simple gullibility of his neighbors. But either way, it worked. He was appointed precinct captain in Norwood Park Township. He wore a little badge, knocked on doors, gave speeches, posed for photos, most famously the one where he's standing next to First Lady Rosalind Carter, grinning so hard it looks painful. Here's the weird part. Before any photo op with a First Lady, the Secret Service runs background checks. So how did a man with a felony sex offense on his record get cleared? Well, Gacy had managed to get his record sealed. That's right, the system basically scrubbed his crimes from view. That badge, the one they gave him, he used it constantly, flashed it at cops, at partygoers, Even at boys he picked up off the street, saying he was an undercover cop, and they were under arrest. A twisted little loophole in his sick power game. Now imagine this. It's late evening. You're 16. You've just finished a shift at a fast food place and are walking home. A man pulls up beside you in a tan Oldsmobile, shows a badge, and says you match the description of someone involved in a robbery. He orders you into the car. He's smiling, polite, but firm. You think he's a cop. By the time you realize something's wrong, you're already in the basement. That's how it worked. Not with violence, not at first. Gacy was careful, charming, disarming. And if he needed more bait, he'd promise jobs through PDM contractors. He'd tell them he had work, good money, a fresh start. One particularly grim anecdote: Gacy once picked up a young man hitchhiking home from Minnesota, brought him back to Chicago, gave him work, let him live in the house for a while. Then, nothing. The boy vanished. His family filed missing persons reports. Nothing came of it. In many cases, Gacy even called the parents himself, told them their sons had run off to start a new life, that they were safe and just needed space. And he said it with such ease, such practiced warmth, that many of them believed it for a while. But the mask kept slipping. A few former employees came forward with bizarre stories. One said Gacy tried to strangle him in the middle of the night, but stopped when he screamed. Gacy brushed it off as a joke. Another said he was offered money for favors. Some reported hearing strange groaning sounds under the house. Gacy always had a reason. Just rats. Just pipes. Just dreams. Meanwhile, the crawlspace was getting full. He started running out of room. Think about that. Running out of room for bodies. That's not a metaphor, it's a logistical crisis in his twisted reality. At some point, he considered dumping victims in the nearby Des Plaines River. Some, we now know, ended up there. Still, he maintained the facade. The parties continued. The community events. The smiling photos. The casual jokes about handcuffs. Here's a fringe detail most people forget. Gacy kept a clown room in his house. A whole room, wall-to-wall clown memorabilia, red noses, party hats, photos of him in costume, like a shrine. And not just for kids. He'd invite adult friends in there too. Laughing, drinking, talking about civic events, all while surrounded by painted faces with frozen smiles. You want a symbol of duality? That's it. Now, one evening, in 1975, a young employee named John Butkovich vanished after confronting Gacy about back pay. They argued. Butkovich stormed off. He was never seen again. His car was later found, keys still in the ignition. No suspects, no leads. The cops asked Gacy a few questions. He smiled, cooperated, played dumb, and just like that, they moved on. The irony? He buried Butkovich under the garage. At this point, Gacy was killing regularly, monthly, sometimes more. The police were starting to catch whispers, but nothing stuck. Remember, many of the victims were marginalized. Runaways, hitchhikers, kids kicked out of their homes for being gay. Society didn't always go looking for them. Historians still argue whether this blind spot was due to bias, bureaucratic sloppiness, or a deeper unwillingness to believe someone so normal could be so evil. Probably all three. But for now, Gacy kept climbing. In public life, in body count, in confidence. At one party, a guest remembered seeing Gacy standing alone in the kitchen, staring out the window, drink in hand. When asked if everything was okay, he turned slowly and said, "You know, clowns can get away with a lot." Then he smiled, and the conversation moved on. You're in front of the mirror now. The white face paint goes on first. Thick, cold, greasy. You pat it in with a sponge like you've done 100 times before. Then the red bold arcs around the mouth, exaggerated to an unnatural grin, blue triangles above and below the eyes. Sharp, angular. The kind of face that would make a toddler cry if they stared too long. You stare at yourself in the mirror, and for a second, you don't blink. Neither does the clown. Meet Pogo. Pogo the Clown wasn't just a costume for John Wayne Gacy, it was a persona, an escape. A license to act weird, say dark things in jest, push boundaries. Because who's going to take a clown seriously? Pogo gave Gacy access to places other men couldn't go. Hospitals, fundraisers, children's wards, parades, living rooms. And he loved the attention. He loved how people laughed. But what people couldn't see was how Pogo was just Gacy turned inside out. Still him, just painted. You slip into the red and white striped costume, the oversized shoes, the pointed hat, the gloves. There's something cartoonish and garish about it, but also oddly formal, like dressing up for a funeral with streamers. Gacy didn't just play Pogo at kids' parties. Sometimes, he'd suit up just because. Sit around in the costume, talk to friends while wearing it. He even told one neighbor that being a clown was a relaxation thing, that it helped him let go. Which, yeah, that tracks. Here's a quirky fact for you. Real professional clowns follow something called clown etiquette. It includes design guidelines for face paint, behavior rules at gigs, and a general don't be creepy code. Pogo broke all of them. Those sharp shapes around the mouth and eyes, most clowns avoid that it's too aggressive, too threatening. But Gacy leaned into it. He liked the unease. There's a reason why clown phobia skyrocketed in America after the truth came out. At parties, Gacy would alternate between charming and unsettling. He'd do balloon animals, silly voices, magic tricks, but then he'd whisper dark little jokes under his breath, ask teenagers odd questions. Sometimes he'd suddenly turn serious and stare too long. One time, he was performing at a hospital and told a nurse, "You know, clowns can get away with anything." He laughed. She didn't. Historians still debate whether Pogo was simply a cover or a glimpse of Gacy's truest self. Some believe he used the clown to disarm people, to draw them in. Others think it was his way of mocking the world of hiding horror behind a painted grin. Either way, Pogo wasn't funny. He was a warning. Around this time, Gacy started incorporating Pogo into his personal rituals. He kept the costume in pristine condition. He photographed himself in it. Sometimes he'd dress up in private and drink, talking to himself in the mirror. Other times, he'd force young men to look at him while in full makeup, blurring the line between performance and predation. Let's pause for a second. Imagine that. Being handcuffed, helpless, and the man looming over you is a clown, breathing heavily, his painted smile unmoving. There's no punchline to that joke. By the mid-1970s, Pogo had become part of the myth Gacy built around himself. He was the entertainer, the man of the people. He even started bragging that he had multiple personalities: Pogo, Jack, John. He'd use them as excuses, deflecting responsibility. "That wasn't me," he'd say later. "That was someone else." A fringe tidbit? In some letters from prison, Gacy described Pogo as a separate entity. He claimed Pogo had his own voice, and that people didn't understand him, as if the clown was a misunderstood artist instead of a mask for murder. Back in his real life, things were starting to slip. The body count was growing, and he was getting careless. Neighbors reported hearing screams. Others noticed teenage boys entering the house at night and never coming out. But Gacy always had an explanation. "That kid ran away. He stole from me, I kicked him out. You must be mistaken." And still, no one stopped him. He started dumping bodies in the Des Plaines River. His crawl space was almost full. That wasn't supposed to happen. Remember, he built the entire house of lies around control, but now, he was losing it. One particularly disturbing case during this time was that of William Kindred, one of the rare victims who was actually dating a girl when he met Gacy. He disappeared after telling his girlfriend he was going to hang out with a contractor. That contractor, of course, was Gacy. No one ever saw William again. It's important to remember these weren't just nameless victims. These were boys with stories, fears, parents who waited up all night hoping for a knock at the door. Some families still don't know where their sons are. Some of the remains found under Gacy's house were never identified. By 1977, even Gacy knew something was cracking. He tried to throw police off by driving hours away to dump victims. He started sleeping less, drinking more. Friends said he became moody, paranoid. He even told one friend he was being watched, though it wasn't true. Not yet. That same year, he was pulled over for erratic driving. The officer noted a foul odor coming from the car but didn't investigate. Just gave him a warning and let him go. Another near miss. But the scariest part? Even as his inner world spiraled, Gacy was still dressing up as Pogo, still performing, still waving to crowds while hiding the truth under 3 layers of paint and polyester. You can almost hear the squeak of the clown shoes on the linoleum, almost feel the painted eyes watching you. And somewhere under the floorboards, another body settles into silence. You duck under the low beam at the edge of the crawlspace. It smells like wet concrete, and something worse, something sweet and rancid. The light from above barely reaches down here. Your fingers brush against something in the dark. Not dirt, not stone, something soft. Fabric, maybe? Then your palm presses against bone. Welcome to the burial diary of John Wayne Gacy. This wasn't some impulsive dumping ground. It was a method, a ritual, a place of control. Underneath his modest Norwood Park home, Gacy carefully arranged the remains of his victims like a twisted curator, cataloging a secret museum. Each grave shallow, tight, deliberate. Each body folded in on itself, stacked and labeled in his mind. The first victim is believed to have been Timothy McCoy, a teenager Gacy picked up in 1972 at a Greyhound station. They went back to Gacy's house. Gacy claimed they had consensual sex, though we'll never know if that's true. The next morning, Gacy said McCoy walked in holding a knife, so Gacy stabbed him in self-defense. That was his story. But then he told a different version. He said McCoy was making breakfast, that the knife was from the kitchen, that it wasn't an attack, it was a mistake. And then, even more disturbingly, he said that after killing McCoy, he felt a tremendous orgasmic release. That's how he described it. Not regret, not horror, release. Historians still argue whether McCoy was truly the first, or just the first one Gacy admitted to. But most agree that killing unlocked something inside him, a door that should have stayed shut. After McCoy, the murders became a pattern. Most of the boys were lured with promises of work, money, or simply a safe place to sleep. Gacy would bring them home, offer them food or drinks, and then, with sickening predictability, handcuffs. Here's how his so-called handcuff trick worked. He'd say, "Let me show you something cool." Then he'd click the cuffs shut on his own wrists. Smile, twist, twist, pop. Out came the key, and he was free. Then he'd offer to do it on them. Once they were locked in, he'd stand and say, "The trick is, you have to have the key. That's not a joke, that's a death sentence." After the victim was restrained, the violence began. Gacy had a ritualistic system he referred to as the rope trick, a makeshift tourniquet of knotted cloth and broom handle, used to slowly strangle his victims. He told police this with a casualness that chills, like describing how to tie a shoe. But not every death was immediate. Some boys were kept for hours, others for days. He would sometimes sleep next to the bodies. Other times, he buried them quickly. And when the crawl space began to fill, he started improvising, shoving bodies in the attic, the garage, even the backyard. A quirky, grotesque detail. Gacy later complained that digging was the hardest part, said it ruined his back. He even hired employees to do it for him, under the pretense of plumbing or foundation work. Some of those boys disappeared not long after. Now picture this. You're a teenager in the 70s, kicked out of home for being gay, with nowhere to go. You meet a friendly guy who offers you a hot meal and a job. He seems a little odd, sure, but he smiles a lot. He knows local politicians. He talks about business. He even has a clown costume. It's weird, but also kind of harmless. And then, the cuffs click. No one noticed at first, because Gacy staggered his killings, weeks or months between them. But by 1975, something shifted. The murders accelerated, and the crawl space got crowded. He built a drainage system under the house to help with decomposition. Think about that. He literally engineered a way to handle more bodies, a subterranean infrastructure for murder. Pipes, trenches, layers of lime and plastic. Not out of panic, out of planning. By the time he was done, at least 29 victims were buried on his property. 29, and yet, above ground, life continued as if nothing was wrong. Neighbors still waved. Gacy still hosted barbecues, still worked with charities, still dressed up as Pogo. and handed out balloons. It's like the murders lived in a separate dimension, just beneath everyone's feet. One contractor later recalled being asked to install carpet in Gacy's bedroom. As he worked, he noticed soft spots in the floor, like it wasn't level. When he mentioned it, Gacy just smiled and said, "Yeah, we had some plumbing issues down there." That smell? He said it was mildew, or rats. Another neighbor once asked about a foul odor during a party. Gacy told him, "That's just a dead squirrel in the vents." And everyone laughed. Historians now look back at this period, the mid-70s, as the height of his depravity. The way he blended absolute horror with absolute normalcy is almost surreal. That dual existence, it's what made him so effective and so terrifying. It's also why no one caught him. Not yet. But the bodies were starting to weigh him down. Literally. He once complained to a friend about weird dreams and something in the walls watching him. That friend thought he was joking. He wasn't. One time, the ground in the crawlspace actually sank because of how many graves were packed in. Gacy covered it with plywood and kept going. A fringe theory, whispered among true crime obsessives, suggests that Gacy may not have worked alone. Some believe one or two of his employees might have helped knowingly or unknowingly. A few even claim to have dug trenches under the house without knowing why. Gacy denied it. But like many parts of this story, the truth remains muddy. What we do know is this. In the chill silence of that crawl space, young lives ended. Over and over. Names erased. Families left waiting. All while their killer stood above them, smiling through grease paint. And you're still crouched under that floor. You feel the low ceiling brush the top of your head. You feel the weight of silence pressing down. And you start to wonder, how many secrets can one house hold before it starts to groan? You're walking the cracked sidewalks of Norwood Park now, passing modest houses with basketball hoops over garages, dogs barking in fenced-in yards, and porch lights that flicker lazily in the fading light. It's the kind of neighborhood where kids ride their bikes until dinner and parents gossip over hedges. You'd never guess that one of these homes was sitting atop a graveyard. But things are starting to shift. The mask is slipping. John Wayne Gacy is still laughing, still clowning around, still flipping burgers in his backyard, but behind closed doors, his world is beginning to unravel. By 1977, the missing persons reports are piling up. One of the first major breaks, or perhaps more accurately, cracks in Gacy's carefully maintained facade, comes with the disappearance of 19-year-old William Kindred. He tells his girlfriend he's going to meet someone about a construction job. Then, nothing. Days pass. Weeks. His car is found abandoned. Gacy is questioned. He admits to knowing Kindred, says he dropped him off downtown. Police jot it down and move on. Again, historians still argue whether this was incompetence or indifference. Were the cops overwhelmed? Understaffed? Or were they simply dismissing these missing young men because of who they were? Often poor, sometimes gay, frequently estranged from their families. Either way, the result was the same: silence. But Gacy's behavior is getting harder to ignore. He starts acting erratically, loses weight, speaks in paranoid circles to friends, muttering about being set up or watched. He's drinking more, sleeping less. There are rumors of strange smells coming from his home again. More than one neighbor files a complaint about the stench. Gacy blames it on bad plumbing or dead animals in the ducts. No one presses. A quirky little note here. Gacy kept his thermostat cranked to nearly 80 degrees year-round. The house was always hot, stifling, sticky. It wasn't just a personal quirk, it helped mask the smell of decay. A detail that went unnoticed at the time, but in hindsight, unnerving. He's also getting bolder. Some of the boys he lures don't vanish. Some escape. There's a teenage boy named Jeffrey Rignall, for instance. In March 1978, Gacy offers him a ride, then a drink. The next thing Rignall remembers is waking up, tied to a board, with Gacy looming over him, breathing hard through his teeth. For hours, Gacy assaults him physically, sexually, psychologically, then dumps him in Lincoln Park, bruised and broken, but alive. And here's where it gets even more twisted. Rignall goes to the police, files a report, names Gacy, describes the car, the house, the handcuffs, but the police don't investigate, not properly. They call it a he said, One man's word against another's. So Gacy goes home and keeps killing. But Rignall, he doesn't let it go. He writes down everything he remembers. License plate, street signs, furniture, smells. He even starts tailing Gacy himself, hiding in bushes across the street with a notebook in hand. It's almost cinematic, the way this lone survivor plays detective, trying to stop a man no one else believes is dangerous. Historians today look at Rignall as a turning point. If his claims had been taken seriously, if his file hadn't sat gathering dust, so many lives might have been saved. But instead, Gacy's momentum only grows. By late 1978, things are falling apart. The construction business is shaky. Clients complain about missed deadlines. Former employees spread whispers about weird stuff at the boss's house. Gacy's mood swings are more intense some days. He's manic, bouncing between laughter and tears. Other days, he's catatonic, sitting alone for hours, staring into space. He starts telling friends that he's a bad guy, then laughs and says he's joking. One friend remembers him saying, "I've done things you couldn't even imagine." Another says he bragged about knowing where all the bodies are buried. People chuckle nervously. No one takes him seriously. But beneath the surface, the house is groaning under the weight of his crimes. Literally, the crawlspace has reached capacity. Gacy, the control freak, is losing his grip. He's dumping bodies in rivers now, something he always swore he'd never do. He didn't like the mess, the risk, the unpredictability, but there's no more room in the dirt. One of these river victims, an unidentified young man, washed up near Lockport. Police connected the dots just enough to begin circling back to Gacy. But the real break would come soon after, from the disappearance of a boy named Robert Piest. But let's not jump ahead. Let's pause here, in that house on Summerdale Avenue, just before it all crumbles. Picture Gacy, standing in the middle of his cluttered kitchen, the smell of mildew and rot creeping from the vents. He's holding a coffee mug that says, "World's Best Boss." He's staring out the window. The clown suit hangs limp on a hook in the closet behind him. His hands tremble slightly. Maybe it's the booze. Maybe it's the guilt. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the weight of all the voices rising from under the floorboards. He won't stop. He can't. Because Gacy doesn't believe he's going to get caught. Not yet. And that is the most dangerous kind of man, one who thinks he's invincible. You're standing now in the chilled air of a pharmacy stockroom. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. There's the faint scent of antiseptic and cardboard. It's December 11, 1978, and 15-year-old Robert Piest is on his last shift before heading home to celebrate his mother's birthday. But that night, he never makes it home. And with that, everything begins to unravel. Gacy had stopped by the pharmacy that day, said he was scouting for a new remodeling contract, and needed a few boys for part-time labor. Robert overheard, and being the curious, responsible kind of kid who wanted a little extra money for the holidays, he told his mom, "I'll be right back. Just need to talk to this contractor about a job." And then, silence. His coat was still hanging in the break room. His mom waited in the car for over an hour. No call, no sign, just a cold night stretching into worry. This disappearance felt different. Robert Piest wasn't a runaway. He was the kind of kid teachers remembered. Polite, on time, well-liked. His parents called the police that same night. And to their credit, the Des Plaines Police Department actually listened. A young detective named Ron Rowe, in particular, took an immediate interest. They started digging. And guess whose name came up? John Wayne Gacy, the contractor Robert had planned to meet. Here's where Gacy's story starts to crack just a little at first. He told the police he never spoke to Robert, said he was only there briefly and left right away. But then his story changed. He said maybe Robert had approached him, or maybe he misunderstood. The timelines didn't match, the excuses didn't track. Historians still argue what made Robert's case different. Was it timing? Luck? A more persistent police department? Or maybe for the first time the right people actually cared enough to push back. Des Plaines PD began surveillance on Gacy almost immediately. They followed him, watched who he spoke to, monitored his movements. And Gacy? At first, he loved it. Invited officers in for coffee, told them jokes, even bragged about how much he respected good police work. He thought he could charm them, the same way he had charmed everyone else. A quirky moment here, Gacy actually gave the cops dinner. Multiple times. They were watching his house around the clock, so he started bringing them breakfast sandwiches and cups of coffee. One officer later said, "It was the best service I ever got from a suspect." Gacy even invited them to one of his infamous parties. Yes, really, but beneath the surface, he was cracking. While under surveillance, Gacy made a critical error. He invited one of his employees, a young man named David Cram, to dig trenches under the house again. For pipes, he said. But Cram had worked for Gacy before, and something felt off this time. He started asking questions, noticed things, smelled things. At the same time, police started uncovering Gacy's criminal history, the sealed records from Iowa, the prison time, the assault charges. Suddenly, the badge he flashed didn't look so shiny. The friendly clown shtick? Wearing thin. Detective Rowe got a search warrant. The first one didn't reveal much. A couple of suspicious items, handcuffs, driver's licenses that didn't belong to Gacy, a receipt that linked him to Robert Piest, but no bodies. Nothing that would hold up in court. Still, the tension was rising. Gacy knew they were closing in. He began spiraling. Fast. Friends noticed the change. He stopped sleeping, started confessing things in half-joking tones. Told one friend, "I've got something big coming, something real bad." Others say he hinted at trouble under the house. It was like he wanted to be caught, but also didn't want to give up the game. In one particularly strange moment, Gacy walked into his lawyer's office and handed over a crumpled, handwritten confession. He said he'd killed maybe 30 people, that they were buried under the floor, that he wanted to clean his soul. But then, just as quickly, he recanted, said it was stress, or just talk. But the police had already noticed something very important. There was a peculiar smell coming from the heating vents in Gacy's home. Again, this time, they brought in a second warrant, and this time, they brought shovels. Here's the part where the suburban dream collapses completely. A few inches below the concrete floor of the crawlspace, police found the first human remains. Bones, rotting fabric, the curve of a rib cage, the soft click of teeth falling from a broken jaw. Gacy was arrested immediately. He didn't struggle, didn't protest. In fact, he reportedly sighed and muttered, "You got me." And just like that, the biggest true crime case in Illinois history exploded into full view. Over the following weeks, teams of forensic experts and volunteers began excavating the house on Summerdale Avenue. They tore up floorboards, dismantled walls, dug through frozen dirt and lime. One by one, they uncovered bodies, 29 in total, under the house, plus 4 more in the Des Plaines River. Historians still debate the true number. Gacy himself once hinted it was over 40. Some speculate even higher. A few of the victims remain unidentified to this day. Their families still waiting, still wondering. Decades later, the media frenzy was immediate. Headlines screamed, "Killer clown captured." News vans parked on the block. Neighbors stared in disbelief. Some had known Gacy for years, borrowed tools from him, shared meals, let their kids play in his yard. One neighbor was quoted saying, "He always seemed so normal," but normal never meant safe. And as the truth emerged, the myth of the friendly clown shattered. People realized the danger hadn't been hiding in shadows. It had been smiling next door, wearing makeup, serving coffee to the cops. You're in the interrogation room now. The hum of the fluorescent lights is louder than it should be. The metal table is cold, and sitting across from you, hunched in a cheap vinyl chair, is John Wayne Gacy, sweating, pale, his fingers tapping erratically on the tabletop. He's not wearing a clown costume now, just a rumpled shirt, stained with something you don't want to identify, and an expression that flickers between exhaustion and satisfaction. It's December 22, 1978. He starts talking, not because of guilt. Don't give him that much credit. He talks because he wants to control the story. Even now, he thinks he can be the narrator, the misunderstood anti-hero. His confession is sprawling, contradictory, and bizarre. Some of it's true. Some of it, fantasy, ego, lies wrapped in half-truths. But through it all, a horrifying clarity emerges. Gacy tells detectives that his first murder wasn't even intentional, that it just happened. But then he admits that after it did, he felt like he had achieved something. Those are his words. Achieved, not regretted. He describes his victims in cold, clinical language. The kid, the body, number 12, rarely by name. He remembers their faces, but not their lives. And yet, he remembers the exact positions he buried them in. That alone tells you everything. He starts drawing diagrams of the crawlspace. Not sketches, blueprints, arrows, numbers, labels. He points to one section and says, "That's where I put the younger ones." Another spot, "That was full by late 76. He shows officers how he arranged the bodies to avoid overlap, how he dug deeper graves for the heavier victims. Historians still argue whether this was genuine memory or just obsessive control. But either way, the detail was chilling. And it wasn't just under the house. Gacy also described the 4 he dumped in the Des Plaines River, saying he didn't have the energy to dig anymore. He treated murder like labor, something that got tiring. He also mentioned a few victims who were never found, said he lost count after 29. And then he laughed, a low, dry chuckle that one detective said felt like it came from somewhere else. A quirky but deeply disturbing moment. Gacy asked for a KFC dinner during one interview. Remember, he'd managed 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Iowa before his first conviction. When the officers brought him his requested meal, fried chicken, French fries, and a Diet Coke, he picked at it calmly while talking about burying teenagers. Just let that image settle for a moment. The confession continued for hours. Days. Really. He bragged. He wept. He claimed to be multiple people. Sometimes John, sometimes Jack, sometimes Pogo. He talked about the rope trick in such detail that officers had to leave the room to collect themselves. And here's the kicker, he still didn't think he was a monster. He said things like, "They wanted it," or "They were already lost," blaming the victims, justifying, dodging. But the weight of what he'd done was no longer just whispered under floorboards. It was real. It was cataloged. And soon, it was going to court. By early 1979, the official count stood at 33 confirmed murders. But police weren't done yet. The forensic teams were still under that crawl space, still uncovering fragments, still trying to identify remains with dental records, buttons, scraps of clothing. The neighborhood transformed into a construction zone. Cement trucks arrived to pour fresh foundations after the bodies were removed. The smell lingered in the air for weeks. Locals burned candles in their windows. Others moved away entirely. And still, Gacy sat in his cell, scribbling drawings, writing letters, even sending out Christmas cards. One deputy recalled walking past his cell to hear him humming under his breath, "Send in the clowns." Because of course he did. The trial date was set for February 1980. It wasn't just going to be about proving his guilt. That was obvious. No, the real courtroom drama would revolve around sanity. Was John Wayne Gacy mentally fit to stand trial? Did he understand what he was doing? Or was he, as his defense team claimed, suffering from multiple personality disorder and unable to distinguish right from wrong? Here's a fringe angle that never made it far. One psychiatrist claimed Gacy entered a kind of trance state during his murders, that he became someone else entirely. Another expert flat out rejected that, calling Gacy calculating, lucid, and morally vacant, but not insane. The debate continues to this day, and then came the media storm. Every major news outlet in America, and many from around the world, descended on Chicago. Reporters staked out the courtroom. True crime authors started drafting outlines before the trial even began. And somewhere in Hollywood, the idea of the killer clown began to take root in pop culture. The idea that someone could smile, joke, juggle, and kill. Gacy loved the attention. During pre-trial hearings, he winked at reporters, blew kisses, asked for better lighting when they took his mugshot. You'd think he was auditioning for something. He wasn't remorseful. He was performing. The courtroom would be his next stage. And soon, every grim, painful, sickening detail would be laid bare for the world to see. You're now sitting in a packed courtroom in Chicago, shoulder to shoulder with journalists, police officers, grieving families, and morbidly curious strangers. It's February 6, 1980, the first day of the People vs. John Wayne Gacy. And at the center of it all, beneath a cheap haircut and the sheen of sweat on his forehead, sits the man himself. Calm, almost smug, as if this were another photo op. another chance to charm the room. He's wearing a navy blue suit. No clown paint, of course, but if you squint hard enough, you can still see the shadows of Pogo lingering under his eyes. The trial is expected to last weeks. The charge: 33 counts of murder. The plea: not guilty by reason of insanity. Let's pause and break that down. Insanity, legally speaking, doesn't mean you're eccentric or emotionally unstable. It means you were so mentally ill that you didn't understand what you were doing or didn't know it was wrong. Gacy's defense team leaned hard into this. They called psychologists who claimed he had multiple personalities, that when he killed, he became someone else, Jack, maybe, or Pogo, that the real Gacy didn't remember the acts. And at first it sounds plausible. After all, who murders that many people and then throws a barbecue over their graves? But then came the prosecution, led by State's Attorney Terry Sullivan. The prosecution methodically dismantled the idea that Gacy was insane. They painted a picture of a man who planned, organized, and controlled every detail of his crimes. A man who bought lime and plastic sheets, who dug trenches, arranged corpses by size, and rotated bodies to avoid detection, who kept trophies, who joked about his victims. They showed the jury his confession tapes. They showed the crawlspace diagrams he drew by memory. They brought in survivors, young men who'd escaped Gacy's clutches and lived to tell the tale. One such witness was Jeffrey Rignall, the same man who'd been abducted and tortured but released. He took the stand, visibly shaken, and described what Gacy did to him in excruciating detail. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Gacy? He didn't flinch. And here's a chilling fringe moment. When asked by his attorneys whether he believed he was guilty, Gacy answered, "Guilty? Of what? Running a cemetery without a license?" Yes, he actually said that. Historians still argue whether that line was a deflection, a sick joke, or just another window into his ego. Maybe all three. The prosecution also called in their own psychological experts, doctors, who examined Gacy thoroughly. Their verdict? He was a narcissistic sociopath, not psychotic, not detached from reality, just completely devoid of empathy. One of them famously said, "John Gacy knew exactly what he was doing. He just didn't care." The victims' families were there, every day, clutching photographs of lost sons and brothers. Most were teenagers, some as young as 14. Each time a name was read aloud, it echoed through the courtroom like a bell toll. 33 names, 33 ghosts. And then there were the photos. The prosecution displayed images of the crawl space, of the recovered remains, of the house stripped down to the bone. The jury, mostly middle-aged Chicagoans, looked stricken. Some turned away. One reportedly had to leave the room. Gacy watched, blinked slowly, occasionally scribbled in a yellow notepad. His lawyers tried to soften the picture. They emphasized his childhood trauma, his abusive father, his time in prison. They brought in character witnesses, some from his earlier community service days. But nothing stuck, because the evidence was too much, too heavy, too horrifying. Now, a quirky detail from the trial: Gacy doodled constantly during the proceedings. Not just notes, actual drawings, abstract shapes, cartoon faces, sometimes entire landscapes. One court sketch artist said, "It was like he wasn't even there, like he was somewhere else." But the jury was very much present, and after 5 weeks of testimony, arguments, and exhibits, the case went to them. They deliberated for just 2 hours. That's all it took. On March 12, 1980, the jury returned. Guilty on all 33 counts of murder. Gacy reportedly showed no emotion. Not surprise, not anger, nothing. Then came the sentencing phase. Prosecutors demanded the death penalty. The defense asked for mercy, citing his mental illness, but the jury didn't buy it. Their final decision: death. 12 death sentences, plus 21 life sentences stacked behind them, just in case. Historians view this moment as the cultural turning point in how America saw serial killers. Before Gacy, people imagined monsters hiding in dark alleys. After Gacy, they realized monsters wear suits, shake hands, smile for the camera, serve fried chicken, and Gacy leaned into it. Once back in prison, he started writing letters to fans, selling his artwork, yes, including clown portraits. giving interviews. One chilling quote from a 1992 TV interview: "I should never have been convicted of murder. I didn't kill anybody." Denial, delusion, or just more performance? You tell me. Either way, the curtain had dropped. But the show wasn't over yet. Because even behind bars, Gacy kept reaching out. Into the public. Into our nightmares. Into the mythos of American crime. The clown, it seemed, still had a few tricks left. You're standing now in the gray corridors of Menard Correctional Center, a maximum security prison nestled deep in southern Illinois. The walls here are thick, the air stale, and the hum of fluorescent lights is ever present. It's here that John Wayne Gacy spent the final 14 years of his life, cell block to cell block, grinning behind bars like a man still holding on to center stage. But don't imagine him broken or defeated. That's not how Gacy did prison. No, he thrived in it. Soon after his arrival, he settled into a routine. He painted, wrote letters, answered fan mail, conducted interviews, and in perhaps the most surreal twist of all, he became a small-scale entrepreneur. Gacy began selling his artwork, mostly paintings of skulls, clowns, skeletons, and yes, versions of Pogo. He'd mail them out to collectors, journalists, and a growing crowd of macabre hobbyists willing to pay hundreds, sometimes thousands, for a genuine killer clown original. A quirky fact? One of his most infamous pieces is titled Hi-Ho with Mickey, a painting of Snow White's dwarfs with Gacy himself slipped into the scene. He even painted a twisted version of the 7 Deadly Sins series, adding an 8th. Insanity. Let that sink in. He wasn't just behind bars, he was building a brand, and the world, disturbingly, couldn't look away. Historians still argue whether this obsession with serial killers in pop culture books, movies, true crime fandom began with Gacy, or was just crystallized by him. Either way, his name became shorthand for pure evil hiding behind a smile. The very idea of an evil clown, that wasn't born in fiction, that was him. Still, Gacy tried to rewrite his story. He gave bizarre, meandering interviews from death row. He denied ever killing anyone, claimed he was a victim of police corruption, that his confession was coerced, that the real killer was someone else, maybe a contractor he once employed. He even said, "I'm the 34th victim." The layers of denial were as thick as his clown makeup used to be, but his charm? Still potent. Some reporters admitted he was likable, even funny in conversation. He'd make jokes, flatter interviewers, offer them drawings as souvenirs. It was all part of the act. One prison guard later said, "He didn't behave like a serial killer. He behaved like a man running for office." And in a way, that's exactly what he was doing, running for your attention. Gacy had a phone in his cell. He called journalists, lawyers, TV stations. Sometimes he'd leave long, rambling messages about his innocence. Other times, he just wanted to talk. One of his most disturbing calls was to a reporter in the early 90s. Gacy said, "People want to make me out as a monster, but you know what monsters do? They hide in shadows." I never hid, and there's the key, isn't it? He wasn't the shadow. He was the light you followed into the dark. He even tried to publish his own memoir, A Question of Doubt, a poorly edited, meandering mess of half-denials and self-pity. In it, he insisted that he was railroaded and claimed the state of Illinois owed him an apology. Historians still debate whether he truly believed his own story, or if it was all just one last power play. Was this the delusion of a man crumbling, or the cold calculation of someone who couldn't stand being irrelevant? Probably both. Outside the prison walls, his name was still a hot topic. Schools debated whether to teach his case in criminal justice classes. His house had been demolished, the ground cleared, and the address changed to avoid becoming a tourist site. But people still came, still pointed, still asked. Collectors bought his paintings. TV specials aired every few years, and Gacy soaked in the attention like it was sunlight. One fringe tidbit. At one point, he offered to sell his entire brain to science after his execution, saying researchers might find something interesting. Spoiler, they did. More on that later. As his execution date approached, activists protested on both sides. Some argued the death penalty was inhumane, even for a man like Gacy. Others said it was far too generous, that 14 years of appeals and artwork were more than he ever deserved. The state agreed with the latter. On May 9, 1994, Gacy had his last meal fried shrimp, a bucket of original recipe, KFC, French fries, strawberries, and a Diet Coke. Of course it was KFC, because the show must go on, right? At 12:58 a.m. on May 10, John Wayne Gacy was strapped to a gurney at Stateville Correctional Center. Witnesses filed into the viewing room. Journalists, victims' families, officials. The curtains drew open. The IVs were already in place. Gacy looked around the room. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg. His final words? "Kiss my ass." Then came the injection, but even that didn't go smoothly. A clogged tube delayed the process by 10 minutes, an eerie moment that caused some witnesses to shift uncomfortably in their seats, as if, for a second, the man who buried 33 boys might cheat death one more time. But eventually, it was over. At 1:14 a.m., John Wayne Gacy was pronounced dead, and the silence that followed, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You walk back down the hallway of Stateville, past the heavy doors and thick walls, and you wonder, how could one man cause so much damage and still smirk on the way out? You step out into the early morning air, cool, still, almost too quiet for what's just happened. The state of Illinois has executed its most infamous criminal. John Wayne Gacy is gone, but somehow, it doesn't feel like the end. If anything, it feels like his shadow is just beginning to spread. Because now, the questions begin. What do you do with a man like Gacy after death? How do you process a legacy so toxic, so grotesque, that it stains every institution it touches? Law enforcement, psychology, politics, even art. Let's start with the obvious, his body. Per Gacy's wishes, his remains were cremated. But remember that quirky note from earlier? He had requested seriously that his brain be preserved and studied, and that's exactly what happened. His brain was removed during the autopsy and handed over to neuroscientist Dr. Knightson. Helen Morrison, who had interviewed Gacy numerous times over the years in an attempt to understand what made him tick. But the findings? Utterly mundane. No tumors, no deformities, no signs of trauma or disease. Structurally, Gacy's brain looked normal. Historians still argue what that means. Did evil leave no physical trace? Or was it always in the wiring, in the way his brain processed impulse, empathy, and control? Some believe his crimes prove that monstrous behavior doesn't always come from broken biology. It can emerge from somewhere far less visible. The idea that someone can look, sound, and act normal while being a walking nightmare, that's what keeps people awake at night. Meanwhile, the public fascination only grew. TV specials, documentaries, books, art exhibitions showcasing his paintings. Some were quickly taken down after protests. Others were sold at private auctions, with buyers quietly purchasing them as conversation pieces. A few were even burned in public ritual style as a form of symbolic closure. And then there's the house. The infamous address on Summerdale Avenue was demolished in 1979, not long after the investigation ended. The land sat vacant for years. The original house, number 8213, was retired. When someone finally rebuilt on the lot, they gave it a new address, trying to erase the association. But it didn't work. People still drive by, still ask, is this where the bodies were? Neighbors roll their eyes, but you can see the unease. The house may be new, but the ground beneath it? That memory doesn't wash away. You know what's even stranger? Gacy's clown persona became so iconic, so terrifying, that it inspired a wave of fictional killers. Pennywise in it, the Joker's more sinister portrayals. Killer clowns became a trope, spawning Halloween costumes, horror films, even a bizarre, real-life clown panic in the 2010s. All of it, in some twisted way, traces back to Gacy. He didn't just kill people. He rewired how we see clowns, neighbors, and the idea of trust itself. In a broader sense, his crimes forced law enforcement and society at large to rethink how they handled missing persons, especially teens, especially LGBTQ youth, especially those without strong family ties. Before Gacy, the assumption was too often, they'll come back. After Gacy, departments began forming task forces, standardizing databases, and connecting the dots between cases across jurisdictions. Too little, too late for many, but at least something changed. And now, here's a fringe tidbit. In the years after Gacy's execution, multiple death row inmates across the country began claiming they had inspired him or helped him or were pen pals. Some even tried to sell letters supposedly written by Gacy himself. The prison system quietly began cracking down on murderabilia, banning the sale of items linked to violent criminals. But the market never fully died. Some people, it turns out, will always want a piece of the darkness. The question is why? Why do we keep circling back to stories like this? Why are we drawn to men like Gacy, even as we recoil? Maybe it's because they remind us that evil isn't always dramatic or theatrical. Sometimes it's wearing a suit, hosting a cookout, painting balloons on canvas. That contradiction, that blend of ordinary and horrific, is what keeps the story alive. It wasn't just the number of victims. It was the disconnect between what Gacy looked like and what he really was. A man who could make balloon animals for children on Saturday and bury a body on Sunday. One historian described him as a walking warning label. But it's not clear what the warning is. Don't trust strangers. Don't trust anyone who smiles too much. Don't assume kindness means safety. Or maybe the warning is even simpler. Evil doesn't need a mask. Sometimes it wears one anyway, just to make the moment more fun. And so, you leave Menard Correctional Center not with closure, but with a weight in your chest. Because even though Gacy is dead, the questions he leaves behind, they're very much alive. You're sitting now in a college lecture hall, years after Gacy's execution. The professor has dimmed the lights. A slide flashes on the screen, a grainy photo of John Wayne Gacy in his clown costume, frozen mid-laugh. The room is silent. No one's smiling. Today, the professor says, we're going to talk about how the Gacy case changed everything. Because it did. In the wake of his arrest and trial, law enforcement agencies across the US were forced to reckon with just how many warning signs they'd ignored. Not just in Gacy's case, but in countless others like it. Historians still argue whether the system failed because of prejudice, bureaucracy, or simple apathy. Likely, it was all three. But whatever the reason, the results were fatal. 33 confirmed deaths, at least 5 of them, after someone had tried to report Gacy to the authorities. The public demanded change. And for once, the system listened, sort of. Police departments began re-evaluating their handling of missing person reports, especially those involving young men. They started centralizing records, improving interdepartmental communication, and giving more weight to family concerns, even if the missing person was over 18 or came from a marginalized background. This shift led to the creation of databases like NCIC's Missing Persons File, which allowed departments to cross-reference data in real time. Before Gacy, that sort of connectivity barely existed. After Gacy, it became a priority. Also impacted was how parole and sentencing were viewed. Remember, Gacy had been convicted in Iowa in 1968 for sexually assaulting a teenager. He served just 18 months of a 10-year sentence, and then nothing. No supervision, no monitoring, no check-ins. That too changed. Policies began to evolve to include mandatory reporting for certain sex offenders, more stringent parole reviews, and eventually, public registries. These systems were far from perfect, but Gacy's name came up in nearly every legislative debate. His face was a chilling reminder of what could happen if the cracks in the system went unsealed. And the FBI? They began refining their behavioral profiling unit, the same one that would later be dramatized in shows like Mindhunter or Criminal Minds. Gacy's psychological profile became one of the early templates. Charming, manipulative, organized, socially embedded, with a clear escalation pattern and signature behaviors. That mix of traits, masking brutality beneath social success, became a flag for future investigations. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Gacy's crime scenes were actually used as training tools for law enforcement recruits. Diagrams of the crawlspace, interviews with investigators, even audio clips from his confession. They became case studies not just in catching killers, but in not letting them slip through the net in the first place. But the impact wasn't limited to police or courtrooms. Pop culture latched onto Gacy like a leech. In the 1980s and 90s, the wave of slasher films surged, many of them clearly borrowing from real-life monsters like Gacy. Clowns, once symbols of childhood and fun, took on a new and permanent layer of fear. Stephen King's Pennywise may not have been directly based on Gacy, But the cultural link was undeniable. Even Tim Curry, who portrayed Pennywise in the original It miniseries, admitted he avoided going too clown in his performance. Gacy, he said, had already done that. Gacy also sparked academic debates about nature versus nurture. Was he born evil? Was it the abuse from his father? The social rejection? His repressed sexuality? Psychologists continue to study his interviews, writings, and behavior to this day. Some say he was a textbook narcissistic psychopath. Others suggest he had dissociative identity disorder. Still others argue that diagnoses can't explain the sheer volume of his cruelty. And that's the most unsettling part, isn't it? That no single answer satisfies. That even decades later, no one can truly say, this is why he did it. One open scholarly debate revolves around whether Gacy should be considered a true serial killer in the mold of, say, Ted Bundy, who stalked and hunted, or more like a spree killer, who simply found his own controlled territory. Some argue Gacy blurred the lines entirely, creating a new archetype, the domestic predator, one who builds his own ecosystem of horror and invites the victims in. His home was the hunting ground, his crawl space, the tomb. And we still talk about it because it never stopped being terrifying. Another impact? Victim advocacy. Families of the murdered boys became activists. They fought for better systems, more accurate reporting, memorials. Several of them worked with lawmakers to improve how police respond to tips and how they treat marginalized communities. And today, over 4 decades later, some victims still haven't been identified. Yes, still. A handful of Gacy's victims remain, John Does, buried under numbered markers, waiting for someone to recognize a face that no longer exists. DNA databases and genealogical services like GEDmatch have helped crack a few of the cases in recent years. In 2011, one victim was identified through familial DNA, another in 2017. Each time, a family got an answer, but others still waiting. And maybe that's the most haunting legacy of all. Not the bodies, not the clown, but the unanswered questions, the missing names, the grief that never got to finish its story. Because Gacy may be gone, but the damage is ongoing, rippling forward, carried by families, by investigators, by a public forever changed by what happened in that quiet suburban home. You lean back in the lecture hall now. The professor clicks to the final slide, a black and white photo of the torn down house. Nothing but dirt and sky. And for a moment, the silence in the room feels holy, like a grave. You're standing now on the edge of a wide field of memory, dirt, loss, and unspoken stories stretching as far as you can see. The house is gone, the crawlspace sealed, and Gacy long cremated. But even now, decades after the last headline faded, you're still surrounded by the echoes of 33 voices that history very nearly forgot. And tonight, one last question clings to the air. Why did no one stop him sooner? The Gacy case didn't just change criminal procedure, it shattered public trust. It exposed how easy it had been for a man like him to exploit every blind spot, small-town biases, legal gaps, and perhaps most damning of all, the uncomfortable truth that society rarely listens to the vulnerable, especially when they're young, especially when they're queer, especially when they don't look like the kind of victim people rally around. Historians still argue over this point, whether Gacy's victims were failed by indifference or institutional rot. But most agree these boys weren't just murdered physically. They were erased socially long before that, written off as runaways, lumped into lists, dismissed. And it's a tragedy that the world often mourns their killer louder than it remembers their names. Let's pull one thread here. Take William Billy Kindred, one of Gacy's victims. He was 19, soft-spoken, loved to draw. His family reported him missing within 24 hours, but the file sat, cold, forgotten. It wasn't until years later, after Gacy's arrest, that anyone revisited his case. Or Samuel Dodd, who vanished walking home from his part-time job at a gas station. Everyone assumed he'd left town, but he hadn't. He was under Summerdale Avenue the whole time. These boys weren't statistics. They were people, with lives, with families, with dreams, and even in death, some of them are still waiting to be seen. Here's a lesser-known fringe angle. After the case, one day Plains officer began a personal project tracking down missing persons cases that could be tied to Gacy. He kept working long after the investigation officially ended. At his retirement party, he admitted, "I don't think we ever found them all." He wasn't the only one. Independent researchers, genealogists, and even amateur sleuths have spent years trying to give names to the unidentified victims. They comb through yearbooks, scan newspaper clippings, compare dental records, and once in a while, they get a hit. A name, a family to call. But each time, it raises the question, who else did we forget? And Gacy? He didn't help. He often refused to cooperate with attempts to identify victims, claiming he couldn't remember or didn't know their names. Sometimes, he'd offer just enough detail to torment families, then shut down. Other times, he mocked investigators trying to match bones to boys. He controlled the narrative, even after death. But the world kept fighting back. In 2011, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart reopened the cold case files related to Gacy's unidentified victims. He released post-mortem facial reconstructions, reached out to families, cross-referenced DNA. The results? 2 more boys got their names back. Their families got closure. One of those families said, "We finally stopped waiting at the window." Think about that. Decades of waiting for someone who was never coming home. Gacy's name might dominate the story, but it's these families who live in its shadow, quietly, forever. One quirky but powerful moment. At a community memorial service in 2012, someone brought a framed portrait of all 33 confirmed victims. It wasn't graphic, just names, ages, smiles. The oldest was 21, the youngest, 14. That image said more than any trial ever could. And you start to realize this isn't a story about a killer. It's a story about visibility, about the need to be seen, heard, believed. Because for every Gacy, there's a system that allowed him to flourish. And for every victim, there's a society that didn't ask enough questions until it was too late. Some experts now refer to the Gacy case as a crucible, a moment where public failure forged future vigilance. But vigilance can't raise the dead. It can only try to honor them. And sometimes, it can't even do that right. Take the controversy over Gacy's art. After his execution, his paintings flooded the market. Collectors scrambled to buy them. Some displayed them like trophies. Others, in defiance, burned them. One museum even hosted a killer art exhibit, but quickly pulled it after backlash from victims' families. Historians and ethicists still debate, should we preserve the art as psychological evidence, or destroy it as a gesture of respect? There are no easy answers. Even his burial site sparked debate. Though cremated, his ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location. Some wanted to know where others insisted it stay secret. One journalist put it best, "We built him a legend. Let's not give him a grave." But the truth is, his grave already exists. Not in a cemetery, but in the stories we tell. In the horror movies, the textbooks, the late-night documentaries, the true crime YouTube rabbit holes you fall into at 2 a.m., hoping to understand what went wrong. That's where he lives now, in the echoes. And it's up to us to decide what to do with those echoes. Ignore them, or finally listen to what they're trying to say. You find yourself in a small, quiet memorial garden just outside Chicago. No signs, no fanfare. Just 33 stones arranged in a circle, some with names, some blank, and all worn gently by the years. It's peaceful here, the kind of place where you can finally take a breath. And maybe, just maybe, begin to understand the magnitude of what John Wayne Gacy left behind. But understanding doesn't mean forgiveness. And it doesn't mean closure. Because if this story has taught you anything, it's that true monsters don't hide in woods or wear horns. Sometimes they wave from parades, make balloon animals, host community fundraisers. Gacy's charm, that thick layer of performative goodwill, is what let him slip through so many cracks. And in that, perhaps, lies the most chilling truth of all. He wasn't despite his friendliness. He was because of it. His victims, many from difficult or complicated backgrounds, were vulnerable not only because of their age, but because no one was watching out for them. Gacy knew that, exploited it, repeatedly. You remember how he bragged about being too smart to get caught? How he laughed through his interviews? Drew clowns on prison stationery? Sold them to collectors? He was never ashamed, just annoyed he lost. But the world didn't forget. In the years since his execution, dozens of documentaries, podcasts, and films have revisited the case. Not to glorify him, but to decode him, to warn others, to trace the thin red line between the ordinary and the unthinkable. And still, there are things we'll never fully know. Historians still debate whether there were more victims, more bodies undiscovered. Gacy once hinted at others, said he'd lost count. Was that a lie to boost his image, or a final truth, buried forever? Even now, police occasionally get tips, anonymous letters claiming Gacy traveled, that he killed on business trips, that he had accomplices. Most are dead ends, but a few, still open. You glance at your phone. It's 3:17 a.m. And somehow, you don't feel tired, because Gacy's story doesn't lull you, it unsettles you. His name has become part of the modern mythos, a symbol, a warning. His face, painted in red and blue, is almost cartoonish now, but that doesn't soften the impact. If anything, it deepens it, because it reminds you, evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it giggles. A quirky final detail for the road? In 2019, a collector tried to auction off Gacy's last known painting. It was a grotesque self-portrait of Pogo, waving under a rainbow. The asking price? $20,000. The listing? Taken down after backlash. But it was there, briefly. Like him. Gacy, for all his horror, represents something uncomfortable. The idea that beneath the surface of order, community, and normal life, chaos can fester quietly, laughing, smiling, digging. But this isn't his story anymore. It's theirs, the 33, and the families who still light candles, still keep photos on mantles, still whisper, "Happy birthday," to someone who never got the chance to grow up. That's who we carry forward. And now, as the sky outside lightens just a little, and the hum of your fan lulls back into background noise, you realize something. You made it through. You stared into one of America's darkest mirrors, and you didn't flinch. But don't forget what you saw there, because you're part of the world that remembers, the world that keeps watch, and the world that ensures no one like him ever gets to dance in the shadows again. So now, as we near the end of this long, heavy journey, let your breath ease out just a little. Gacy's voice is gone. The crawlspace is sealed. The lights of the courtroom are dimmed. And all that's left is a quiet circle of memory names, spoken gently, lives reclaimed in whispers. You've walked through decades of fear, outrage, and unanswerable questions. You've faced the unsettling truth that evil sometimes wears a friendly face. But you've also seen resilient families who never stopped hoping, officers who kept digging, and communities that chose remembrance over silence. Let those images soften now. Let them blur like candlelight through fog. The gravel crunching beneath your feet outside that old house? Gone. The cold click of handcuffs? Gone. What remains is a stillness, a kind of peace that says, they are remembered. You did well to stay with this story. It's not an easy one, but it's an important one. Because sometimes, staying awake is the only way we make sure it never happens again. So breathe in deeply. Let it out slow. Stretch your arms. Let your mind drift to something warm and safe, a flickering nightlight, the sound of wind in the trees, or just the steady hum of the world turning. You're here. The monsters are gone, and morning is only a dream away. End of script. Sweet dreams.